Alright, so I've had so many technical issues trying to make this video that I actually had the time to type up my own script. So if it looks and sounds like I'm reading from something, I am. So the topic that I chose this week for my first video is the automobile. It's something that many people have, even more want, and it's a symbol of personal freedom. Cars today can be also used as a means of transportation, a status symbol, and much, much more. It's easy to imagine that the automobile itself was designed specifically for that personal freedom that was not allowed to prior generations who were completely reliant upon how far they could travel by horse and cart each day, seeing as the automobile was designed as an alternative method of transportation to a horse and carriage, which not everyone could afford to keep. According to Encyclopedia Britannica's History of the Automobile, there were prototypes and rudimentary outlines for self-propelled vehicle as early as the 15th century by none other than Leonardo da Vinci. In the 1700s, there were many other prototypes of self-propelled vehicles that were brought out to a varying number of degrees of success, including vehicles that used things like windmills, air. There was even a clockwork model. But by far the most successful before the combustion engine was steam. That makes sense because steam was used for a long period of time in trains, which still, I don't know if it still is or not, but yeah. But as early as 1885, Carl Benz started working on the internal combustion engine as a replacement for the horse and carriage. His first success made it around the track about 4 times before completely breaking down and becoming unusable. But in the 1890s, he made a much better effort and eventually sold more reliable models at that time. With the growth and rapidly expanding popularity of the automobile, or what we now call cars, became more accessible to the affluent. So gradually through the 20th century, they became even more standard in Western society, especially in the 1920s when Ford made the automobile a lot more accessible to the American public in general. It was an affordable, reliable model. So this process, to me, seems to exemplify the Scott technique example from our textbook in that the models that were considered for different uses and needs. The clockwork engine, for example, while it sounds really fun, was probably highly specialized and really difficult for anyone to keep up unless you were a clockmaker. Whereas the steam engine was widely used and taken advantage of in trains, so that seems like it would be a little bit more, useful back in the day. But by far the combustion engine seems to be the best at getting you where you want to go. So the automobile was born as a societally acceptable, more convenient method of transportation to that of the horse and carriage. It replaced it. So let's look at today's society and how we interact with cars. Now that automobiles, as we know them, are widely used and even expected to be owned, they do have a fairly massive effect on society today, but the desires of society also have a heavy influence on the designs of the cars themselves. Today we've got so many different types of automobiles that it's actually fairly easy to see how they gained their own individual technological momentums. And they are, in fact, a technological system as well as a technical based on Hughes's definitions of the two terms in our textbook. They contain a physically growing inventory of artifacts in their long and varied history, and we can go back and look at the technical record left behind when we see these artifacts. But also, they are sociologically linked to humankind and have created their own socio-technical subsystems within our society. Car culture is very alive and well. For example, with hybrid cars today, we can see how a slowly growing consciousness of the environment can influence the design and use of automobiles. We also have trucks being born from the necessity of hauling things around with us that otherwise would not fit into a standard passenger vehicle. So here, the needs have designed the artifacts. In his review of Daniel Miller's Car Culture, Richard Wilk discusses the fact that many sociological studies done on cars today find nothing but contempt for these machines that can often have a negative impact on urban planning because you've got to figure out where to put roads and highways and move people around when you do that. Social life and the environment. However, I do agree with Miller and Wilk in that these condemnations are actually pretty one-sided. While these things can be side effects, they can also be shaped by societal demand, like the examples I gave before, and if there are more people driving, you're going to have more roads and highways. So while yes, cars are loud, obnoxious, gas-guzzling beasts, they do also have some very useful places in society. There are also many ways in which the artifact has designed, or rather enforced, the needs in turn. The automobile has shaped the way people work, travel, and socially interact. While you could be friends with your social group directly around the area of your home when you were a kid and you couldn't go out on your own, today with a car you can drive for days to go see your best friend in another state. You can commute to work, you can have anything, create any products, gifts, and so on, transported for you via automobile in a slightly more reliable, faster fashion than the old method of steam train, which could take days instead of a couple of hours. But as far as personal freedom goes, the automobile definitely embodies and enhances that concept. In her article, Scientific American author Crystal DaCosta briefly discusses the thrill of owning a vehicle in that it provides the choice to go wherever you want, the control to go where you want, and the freedom to hop in and take off whenever. On a personal level, I can attest to this, that I have had some things to get away from in my life before, and there's no better feeling than that sitting behind your steering wheel and just being able to go as far as your gas tank will let you. So that brings me over to potential conflicts, though, because the cars can break and constantly need maintaining. Still less than a horse, though. And this is an ongoing conflict for people who can't afford to constantly buy a newer model car, and there's always going to be some amount of upkeep cost, no matter what. Whether it's buying gas, basic maintenance, oil changes, cost can be an obvious conflict with these things. Likewise, if your vehicle breaks down and you're unable to fix it, or if they're unable to get the part immediately, there are potential consequences to your social life, from canceling with your friends to even possibly losing your job because you can't get to work. This causes even more complications and can have a reciprocating effect around your whole entire life and your individual sense of identity, causing psychological issues. Perhaps a worse and somewhat connected conflict is that of consumerism. You buy a car, your neighbor buys a better, more expensive car, and then you end up hating your neighbor because you're stuck pushing your old junker off to the side as he drives by in his new Mercedes. It's this sort of keeping up with the Joneses attitude and consumer-driven lifestyle that can be the problem. Not the car itself, although the consumerism around the car does enhance that. Who doesn't want to get enough money, buy a fancy car, and show it off to all of their friends? But perhaps the worst conflict with cars these days is the fact that there are just too many of them. Cars can produce damaging and dangerous chemical byproducts to the environment, and we see this more and more in the media and such today because it's a real thing. So this is the major long-term conflict that we as a society are just starting to deal with and come up with solutions for in the last couple decades. But while cars are convenient and wonderful things, we do need to strive in the future to find a way to keep this freedom that we have grown accustomed to while making a little less of an environmental impact on the world with our vehicles. All right, here's hoping this uploads now. Thanks.